Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our panel discussion here this morning. Nice to see so many people in the room. We have a really broad topic this morning, so we would love this to be a really interactive session. So we've got four great panellists that I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment. But please, we'd love as much of the questions to come from you this morning. So I'll talk you through the Slido app in just a moment, but let me first introduce you to our panellists. Starting closest to me, this is Sam Retallack. Sam's role is to provide leadership and oversight of all people and culture activities at IGO. That includes diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, learning and talent development, remuneration, and leading the development of the organisation's culture, purpose and values. Sam is also responsible for IGO communications and brand, and the corporate office administration and operation. She's been with IGO since 2013 as Human Resources Manager, was appointed Chief People Officer in 2022, and has recently taken responsibility for safety and wellbeing. She comes with over 30 years experience in senior management, human resources, consulting and operational roles working for a range of organisations, including, and here's a blast from the past, Ahern's Department Stores. And another blast from the past, Ansett Airlines. Wow. You said, I did notice that. I didn't want to say that there was a pattern there, Sam, but all right. Sam Retallack, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Lee is at the far end. Sam is an inspector of mines within the mental health and wellbeing team at WorkSafe Mine Safety. Sam is an organisational psychologist and works with the resources industry, applying the current health and safety laws to workplace behaviour issues, injuries, psychosocial hazards and associated risk factors. Sam was part of the implementation team for the WorkSafe WA Mentally Healthy Workplaces strategy and has been involved in the development of the recent psychosocial hazards in the workplace and workplace behaviour codes of practice. So thank you also for being with us this morning, Sam. Next to Sam, we have Richard Cohen. Richard has been with Rio Tinto now for almost 3 decades. He's a passionate leader, passionate when it comes to creating a workplace where everyone feels safe, respected and included, and sees the role that Rio Tinto can play in diversity and inclusion and really prioritising what really matters, everyday respect for everyone. Which is at the cultural foundation of Rio Tinto's iron ore strategy for their people and the communities that they operate in right around the state. As the Managing Director of Port Rail and Core Services, Richard has accountability for the end-to-end supply chain, moving iron ore from 17 mines across the Pilbara onto the rail network through 4 port terminals at Dampier and Cape Lamberts. I think he mentioned to me before he's got about 4,000 people under his watch, so a significant responsibility. He's also responsible for the Dampier salt business and the provision of core services including towns and facilities management, support infrastructure, utilities and associated services across the iron ore operations. That sounds like a lot, Richard. So thank you for making time to be with us this morning. And finally, in the middle there, next to the other Sam, is Owen Whittle. Owen was elected as the Secretary of Unions WA in 2021, having served for 8 years as Assistant Secretary, during which he led a major campaign for occupational health and safety law reform, resulting in the successful modernisation of work health and safety laws. Owen was a member of the Ministerial Advisory Panel into Work Health and Safety Reform in 2017 and 18. He's been a member of the Work Health and Safety Commission since 2014, was a chairperson of the Welfare Rights and Advocacy Service and is a non-executive director of WorkCover WA. So they are our panellists. So we've got a lot of expertise here up on the stage for you this morning. So please pepper them with questions as much as you can, with respect, of course, because that is the theme of our session here this morning. So in terms of the Slido app, I'm sure many of you have used the Slido app already. It's pretty simple. If you just log on to slido.com, there's no AU, SLIDO.com, and it'll ask you for a code. The code you need for this particular session is MIS1. Mining Industry Summit 1. That will take you directly into the session here. So if anyone's having troubles with that, just put your hand up and I'll repeat it again. You can submit questions anonymously, you can put your name to it, you can also just go in there and endorse other questions as well. Or you could just point your phone at the QR code on the screen. That's even easier. Thank you. If you do want to do it old school style, it's MIS1 is the code that you'll need. You can put questions anonymously, put your name to them if you like, and you can also endorse others who've submitted questions as well. That will bump it up the list and give it higher priority and more chance of it being asked. So feel free. It is a really broad topic, so I'm looking forward to seeing your input throughout this session as well. All right, I'm going to take a seat now and we'll get things underway. That's my slider. I think I'm about to ask Siri something. That's not going to go well, is it? All right, here we go. Let's start with a pretty broad topic question just to get things underway. The Enough is Enough report that landed with a bit of a thud a bit over a year ago. To each of you, was there anything surprising that came out of that? Anything that sort of made you sit down and go, wow, I was not expecting that? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So we had two reports in Rio. Obviously, the Enough is Enough report. Just before that, we had the Everyday Respect report, and I think the themes from both reports were very similar. They were very confronting, as everyone knows that's read them. And for me personally, I'd been in our organisation a long time, and I really had to look at myself and think about how had I been an operator, a maintainer, a supervisor, a leader in our business, in a culture that really was unacceptable. And so I found it really confronting. Had to read both reports a number of times. And there was a piece of advice Liz Broderick gave us at Rio Tinto that really stuck with me when she did our report, which was, as a mining company, we tend to be largely a group of engineering type people. We tend to have a bias to action. And what she said is actually sitting in the discomfort is an important part of this process. And that's really tough. Sitting on your hands, reading the report again, reflecting on the report before you decide what you're going to do, probably one of the toughest things I've had to do as a leader. We want to get out, we want to fix it. Unfortunately, I think if you do that, you can't get to the heart of the problems and you can't get to the right answers and you won't get sustained improvement. So that whole feeling of sitting on your hands, living in discomfort was something that I really learnt through this journey.
Can I ask, what was it that made you sit in such discomfort? Was it the scale of it? Was it the nature of it? Personal experiences of yours?
It was all of it. For me, probably the most confronting bit for me was that I didn't understand how other people were feeling in our workplace. There's a lot of stats in both reports, but I spend a lot of time going to our sites. I spend a lot of time in our villages, and I don't think about my personal safety when I'm walking between my room and the mess. But to hear that we have people that have to do that, to hear that we have people that chose to eat in their rooms rather than go to the mess because they felt uncomfortable, wasn't my experience. It also wasn't what I saw, and I really had to question why I didn't see that and why I wasn't sympathetic and already doing something about it.
Sam?
Look, I think it wasn't a surprise, but I think the breadth and the depth of those reports really was surprising. I think if you're a woman working in an industry where there's predominantly men, I feel like I've always had that sense of that. I certainly never felt unsafe, but at the same time I could see that there were people in the industry that really did. I've worked at IGO for a very long period of time, and I think perhaps that familiarity was a really interesting thing because it made us take a look at some of the things that we had been doing around culture for quite a while and actually look through and say, is there anything more we can do here? But the thing that I have really appreciated is that it has changed the conversation completely about this topic. It has legitimised the fact that people feel like this, and then it's not just a hysterical group of a few people who've had a few bad things happen to them. And that change, I think, has made an immeasurable difference. And I feel really now like we have a platform to go forward. So that's what's changed.
Yeah. So it was a real line in the sand when it came out.
I think so. I think what it highlighted is that, people's experience in the workplace is different, and you have to speak to people about that.
Oh, and what about for you? I'm sure you had some understanding of what was coming in that report, but was there anything that kind of made you stop and, pick your jaw up off the floor?
I think, what I reflected when that report came out is that we often forget that this was actually the second parliamentary committee report. There was one about 10 years ago about fly in, fly out, and it was more mentally, it was framed around mental health, but all the same undercurrents were through that report. A range of the recommendations, and what surprised me was that a range of those recommendations were very similar. It's just that after the first report, they largely got forgotten about or thrown in the bin and not acted on. And the second report came out, received substantially more publicity, and therefore I think there was that call to action to respond to it. But many of the things like the position of wet messes, the design of camps, work flexibility, that was all in the first report. There was harrowing evidence from individuals in that report as well. But, while it was surprising there was the similarity in the reports, I guess it's a note kind of how culture and expectations has changed in workplaces, that this second report has actually spurred the conversation and level of change that we're now seeing.
Amazing. 10 years ago, not that long ago, really, is it? So how far the conversation, at least, has come. What was it, do you think, that saw that first report fall flat?
Look, I think there wasn't political will in relation to its implementation, and a range of the regulatory changes that were suggested took 5, maybe 6 years to be implemented, which was far too long. I think some of the advantages of this report is we've actually seen within 12, 18 months a range of the recommendations acted on. And the speed of that, I think, has, and the publicity that's been involved around that has, I think, gone a long way.
Yeah. Sam, obviously you're part of the regulator now. How's your life changed since all these recommendations were passed through? You must be busy.
I guess in my sort of role, I've, always had the opportunity to listen to a lot of workers and their unique experiences in a workplace, the good, the bad, the ugly. When the report came out, it wasn't surprising, I believe, for myself and a number of my colleagues and the broader management. We already had a number of initiatives underway, so it was encouraging that when the report came out with a lot of recommendations, we'd already started making progress, and it just spurred a lot more conversations, a lot more change. When I guess, kind of came out more to workplaces to inspect them, to have the conversations with managers to look at psychosocial hazards, sexual harassment, it wasn't a immediate shutdown. It's a HR issue. We do it through that channel. There was a bit more of an acceptance and opening to look at it from a work health and safety perspective, to look at the work-related factors, and seeing a lot of those changes, I guess, not in organisations, but also on a government and legislative sort of level. We're in a really exciting time.
Just to break down one of the buzzwords that we're hearing a lot already this morning, psychosocial hazards. What are you predominantly looking for? What are you talking about?
So look, many of you would have heard the term. We're looking at hazards arising from the psychological and social conditions of the workplace. That's also really wordy in itself as well. To break it down even further, work design, workplace interactions, job tasks, working environment. So all those things can play quite a fair bit of effect on people in workplaces. What we often say with workplaces is treat it as you would with any other sort of hazards. Integrate it into your system management plans, and have a conversation with us if there's any particular sort of queries or concerns.
Richard, what has changed in the last 18 months or so since those 2 reports that you mentioned have come out under your watch at Rio? What has tangibly changed? Can you give us any examples?
Sure. Look, I think a lot has changed. Probably what I like the most is the conversation in the workplace has changed, and we've heard a bit about that already this morning, about it's got to get to the level that makes a difference for everyone in our workforce. One of the things the mining resource industry is really good at is safety. And we got good at safety probably 20, 25 years ago. And in some ways, and not in all ways, I liken the journey to that. When we started on physical safety, we had to force it into the conversation. It wasn't part of our natural conversation. And at Rio, we've done the same now with psychosocial safety. So when we now have a psychosocial incident across our business, we look for themes, we take that, we create what we call a purple banner. that purple banner is like a safety notice. And all of us know what happens with a safety notice. It goes to a pre-start meeting, a supervisor's got to have a conversation, engage the crew and talk about it. 12 months ago, 18 months ago, that is not a conversation that could happen at a pre-start meeting. What I'll say is we have a whole range of supervisors across our business, some who are fantastic having that conversation, some who are pretty clunky at it, and that's okay. We've just got to get a little bit better today than we were yesterday. Having the conversation's really important.
What's the response been like amongst the workforce to these new changes? Because, not to generalise, but some people who are from a different time have a different view on how these things should be managed on a pretty brutal work site in many places, being out in remote conditions. What's the response been like from the workforce?
It's been really mixed. Not surprisingly, I think, to your point, is there's a lot of different backgrounds, there's a lot of different experiences that come into the workplace. And so this sort of change, this magnitude of cultural change, and at the speed we're trying to do it, is going to have a reaction. The first thing I'd say is we are getting a reaction, some good, some bad. I'm really encouraged by both, because if we weren't getting a reaction, we wouldn't be trying and moving enough. So I think all reactions are really good. We see some people embracing it from all backgrounds. We see some supervisors really struggle because some of the behaviours they're now saying are unacceptable, they know they've demonstrated in the past, and they're torn between how do I pull up my crew for something that my crew saw me do 3 years ago, and helping them through that journey is really important. And we do see absolutely a group of people that probably look a bit like me, middle-aged white males, that feel now that they can't bring their whole self to work, that they're nervous, that they're walking on eggshells when they come to the workplace. That's okay. That's a conversation we've got to lean into and have as well, because the reality is we do have to change.
Sam, what have you seen out on the work sites themselves? How have these new measures and initiatives been welcomed out there or not welcomed? How have they rolled out?
I would say mixed as well. One of the challenges that we have is that we are an industry, we are companies within an industry. Some of the reactions are from long-held societal, trends and behaviours that have been in the Australian society for many years. And I think, people come to work and they have to work within this environment, and then they go home and they go back to the same thing. So some people have reacted really well. We've done a really fantastic experiential training process or rollout through the organisation that has actually helped people understand the feeling of this, and I think that's been really influential in helping people have a different experience or help understand people's different experience. But it's, we've been very careful over many years to try and not force it, but at the same time make progress as quickly as we could.
How do you tackle the people who aren't on board? Do you have to sit them down and just talk them through this is how we do things now? Adapt or die? Is it as brutal as that?
Not quite adapt or die.
But really,
we try to keep people
if they're not going to
alive.
comply with company policies, the consequences of that can be you don't fit in with our way of doing things now. So
It's interesting for us. We started a cultural journey in 2017, and so our people have been quite familiar with the fact that we're interested in culture. We're interested in a whole range of different things that drive culture. The influences in the organisation, the people that have control, the stories we tell, the things we do. So that narrative has been around for a while, but. To be fair, there have been some people that have left our organisation because they've acted in a way that was inappropriate, and we've moved them on. So it's just inappropriate.
Yeah. Sam, specific question for you. Thank you for the questions coming in so far. Please keep them coming, and if you want to direct it at one of our panellists in particular, then please do so. Sam, what is DMIRS looking at when doing inspections in relation to psychosocial risks and hazards? What are you actually looking at?
So we take quite a systems of work focus, and you'll see that in a lot of the correspondences that the inspectors will have with you as well. So when I talk about systems of work focus, we just want to see what's in place in your organisation to prevent and manage hazards of this nature. So it could be breaking down to the way that, I guess, what processes, communications do you have in place with your workers to ensure that everyone there knows how to raise and resolve concerns? How do you proactively deal with the cultural changes, interventions? Do you integrate, I guess, your risk assessments, your safety management systems? So our inspection can be quite broad with those sort of conversations. We do also want to sometimes see how things are resolved on a local level. So when there are reports of psychosocial hazards, inappropriate workplace behaviour, again, we have that sort of trust that as an employer, you will have the systems to resolve those things at a local level. But part of that is to also speak with workers, speak with managers, speak with all other different peoples of the organisation, just to see how things have played out from their perspective as well, and feed back into the broader system. Proactively with work health and safety, we do, I guess, sometimes can take a mixture between compliance and education as well. But a lot of times we want to see if you identify the sources of risk in your business. Okay, so if you've got workers raising concerns to you, if you've got hazard reports coming through, if your pre-starts are, I guess, kind of identifying and talking about the same sort of thing, what are you doing to address those sources of risk? Because quite often, sometimes when we talk about human behaviour, we focus on the individual. Is the individual's stress, resilience, their way of dealing with that situation? What we want to try to get workplaces to look at is that, is there a particular practice or culture that's perpetuating that behaviour, and starting that conversation there?
Yeah. Can I ask, I know you can't speak about specific examples here, but are you seeing a lot of non-compliance?
So I've come from, I guess a bit of history, so I've come from the general industries side of thing and moved to the mine safety sector. There have been some areas of improvement. Some of them have been pretty, I guess, I don't want to say minor, but the business is already underway in addressing a lot of those concerns. Some of the more substantial ones, they really do tie into cultural change. So that's really feeding into flaws in systems, information, training. Often cases where you get a lot of the behaviours occurring again and again, and we're seeing a lot of the harm to health occurring across different workers. So that's where I guess we've been focusing our attention on.
Yep. It's all very well for us to be sitting here in a nice room, air-conditioned, having a very pleasant day, talking about these. But we're talking also about working environments that are vastly different to this. They're out in the middle of nowhere, they're isolated, long days, weather's hot, can be dusty, the list goes on and on and on. And you often hear of people talking about a disconnect between what's talked about at boardroom level and what is actually in place in reality at some of these work sites. Maybe this is a question for you, Sam and Richard. How do you overcome that disconnect? How do you take the conversations that happen in boardrooms and make them so on a work site?
Well, I think you start on the work site. I think the conversations that happen in boardrooms are as a result of what's happening on the work site. You ask people, you talk to them. We do an annual cultural audit. And we have done for many years. We listen. I don't think if you care about people, as we said before, and treat them well, I don't think the signposts are that hard to see. And then, I think there has to be a real open and honesty, or openness and honesty, feeding that up to the board. My view with our board has always been no surprises, and I think you have to have that honesty through the organisation, but also with the board.
Yep.
So.
I think the people that really move culture in our organisation are supervisors and superintendents, because they are the ones in the field, they are the ones that see the whites of people's eyes. And so we need to invest in them. They're a critical part, and building their training, building their skill set, helping them through a journey, really, really important. I think it's also absolutely a responsibility of senior leaders to be in the field and visible. And I was at one of our mine sites last week, and I'm in the Pilbara just about every week, but I had a great experience. I went to a pre-start meeting for a drill and blast crew, and those of you familiar with mining, drill and blast crews are dusty, harsh environments. And on their pre-start meeting, I saw something that I haven't seen before, and it was an emotion wheel. And they've got a wheel dial that describes all the good and bad emotions, and they ask in the morning how people are feeling and refer to the wheel and have that conversation at a pre-start meeting. That, for me, is a symbol that things are different, because that wouldn't have been 6 months ago, let alone 12 months ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah. And how did it play out?
It was fascinating. The first thing is I got asked first, so I had to role model, which was a bit of a surprise to me, but talked about how I was feeling on the day. And then out of a crew of 7, 8, 9, I think 3 or 4 spoke to the wheel. 3 positive, 1 that had had a bad experience the night before and talked about it openly in that crew. Having that conversation is a step in the right direction.
Did you want to add to that, Sam?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a really good point. You know, those mid-level managers, senior managers, we're asking them to do something quite different. And we talk a lot about leadership development and leader development and all of the associated kind of elements. But, you know, we're asking them now to go from being technical people and be celebrated for being excellent technical people to be considering an emotion wheel. And I think that, you know, I've heard a lot over the years about soft skills. Well, all of a sudden, you know, the world has shifted and that's something, you know, soft skills now are technical. So it's supporting that development that is just absolutely critical.
Yeah. One for you here, Owen. How are organisations and unions engaging with each other to raise the cultural profile on the ground?
Look, it's a good question, and I think in a peak body level, there's been a very practical relationship between unions and employer organisations around the framework and policy setting that kind of exists. You know, we've gone through the work health and safety harmonisation process. Sam's kind of talked about the codes and the new psychosocial codes and some of those parameters, and all of those have been done through a joint union and employer process, which I think has actually developed some very robust, probably actually definitely the best codes and regulatory guidance we have in the country around the issue, which I think is a positive step. I think in workplaces, and this was talked about earlier by AMEC, but I think we've often talked about these issues in the space of IR and HR, and I think when we move it to a more tripartite safety space, not just in the policy setting, but in the workplace as well, and we activate our kind of democratic workplace structures such as health and safety representatives, I think that's where we're actually able to have very good pragmatic conversations in workplaces. When it gets dragged into HR and IR, and when we talk about disciplining people for saying things the wrong way, I think that's where entrenchment occurs. It becomes very legalistic, but I think safety and focusing on eliminating harm under our work health and safety frameworks is the space for that to occur.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, you both work for fairly sizable organisations, particularly you, Richard. Where is it coming from within the organisation? Is it being led by HR? Is it being led by, you know, your legal team, by management? Where's the drive actually coming from?
I think importantly, it's not being led by HR, it's not being led by safety, it's being led by operational leaders. And that's absolutely the right place for this. We post Everyday Respect, kicked off a program, and we called it People at Our Heart. And I sponsored that on behalf of the organisation, not the head of people and not the head of safety, because the reality it is the people that lead people that are going to make a difference.
Same for you, Sam?
Look, in our organisation, our culturing program has been led by leaders in the operations since 2017. So we always knew that it wasn't something that the people and culture team could do. I mean, we could help them, but you know, that's where it sits.
Yeah, and I know you, the former head of IGO, Peter Bradford, who we sadly lost, a year or so ago, October. What did he make of that Enough is Enough report? Because he's been a great champion for, for better workplace standards, hasn't he? Gender and diversity generally in the workforce. Greater representation. He stood for all of those things. He was a champion, wasn't he? What did he make of that report?
He was, once again, not surprised, but floored by the depth and the breadth of the feeling that came out of that. I mean, you're absolutely right. He was fundamental in our organisation at supporting. Often we talk about somebody driving it, but he supported people to be their best. And I think his drive around care and consideration is really at the heart of this.
Yeah. psychosocial hazards that are raised by staff, how should they be recorded or registered at the workplace? What's the process there? This might be one for you, Sam.
I'll speak very generally. So they can be raised in many different ways. And I guess when I come out to workplaces, I want to see all the different channels that, I guess, concerns of this nature can be raised. So it could be anywhere from reporting to a manager, verbally, formally, email, whatever it might be. It might be through the formal processes that are currently in place in an organisation. What I like to see more proactively is organisations speaking with workers rather than waiting for something like this to happen. Okay, so waiting for a grievance report, waiting for an incident report. Some organisations might do it through their cultural surveys. They may actually go out, speak with workers, observe workers, because as I mentioned before, psychosocial hazards and risks that arise from not only the social interactions, so the workplace behaviours that you see with people interacting with one another, but also the working environment, the work design. So if you hear things where people, I guess, are commenting that, you know, we've got just really lack of autonomy to do our job, there's a lot of rigid rules and supervision, which is way beyond reasonable. So if you hear a lot of those sort of comments, those may also allude to different sources of risk that may give rise to broader issues. So I would say, yeah, multiple channels, how that looks like in your organisation, just see what's currently in place and what else further you could do to engage and consult with your workers.
Are you finding that there's still a lot of people who have had a negative experience, bypass those internal channels because they don't feel comfortable reporting it maybe to their immediate superior? They go to, say, their union rep, someone external, to sort it out because they don't quite believe in the internal systems in place?
Definitely. As a regulator, we are often contacted when a person sometimes just doesn't feel safe going through the internal channels, or they've gone through the internal channels and have felt quite let down by the process. So some workers, yeah, definitely they've reached out to their unions, spoken to peers, but still felt quite lost in that they couldn't really access or go through the internal systems. Holly Ransom mentioned psychological safety. That's a huge thing in workplaces. It can really make or break the effectiveness of the systems that you've got in place, or even the proactive conversations that you can have on mental health, hazards, risks, all that sort of stuff.
Are you finding the same, Owen, given the union's heavy involvement as well in the mental well-being and health of workers, not just the physical well-being of workers? Are you taking a lot of inquiries, a lot of contact from workers directly who've just gone straight to you rather than tried to address it within the company itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I reflect that when this conversation first started, I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, we had a resources company that, when responding to try to address, create a framework for reporting, put out a survey to the workforce to try to understand the depth of the issue that they had. And it was a compulsory survey that wasn't anonymised, that asked a series of questions about, relationship with partners, how much you drink at night, do you take illicit drugs? And then, that was a very clunky way of trying to kind of, tease out, the problems in the workplace. But of course, as soon as the workforce sees a non-anonymised survey that asks them those questions, immediately go into a bunker and seek alternative ways to raise the issues, and that's been with the regulator and with unions. I think I'm pleased to see a substantial change in the regulator over recent years, where they're more willing to take complaints about organisations rather than sending people back through internal processes, and I think that's really important. But also, secondly, I think a range of the other, I know there's been some funding for Circle Green, but also there's been a skilling up for trade unions to be able to kind of take some more heavy reporting that's kind of coming through to us kind of independently of those other structures, because people are seeking, I suppose, a safe haven or a place where they believe their complaints will be anonymous and acted upon.
While I've got you there, Owen, someone who's come from more the construction side of things wants to know, as the rep for Unions WA, have discussions begun with other unions for non-mining industries? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think while the focus and the intense focus on the resources sector through this parliamentary inquiry has been extremely welcome, we really need to start the conversation in a range of other workplaces. Last week I was dealing with an issue in an NDIS provider where the CEO, director, was walking around throwing sex toys at workers, including leaving them in coffee cups of some of the people in the office. I've been dealing with a whole range of issues across different sectors. We had in retail a manager who, this is 2 weeks ago, who made some very inappropriate comments I won't repeat to a 17-year-old retail worker, was then reinstated a week later with no WHS protections or change to the workplace or any consequences in relation to their actions. So I think the resources industry is on a journey. I think a lot of other industries have a reckoning that is coming, and I certainly hope that that's sooner rather than later.
There was a feeling, it's certainly expressed by some within the resources industry, when there was all the publicity that led up to the inquiry and then the release of the Enough is Enough report, that this was an industry that was being unfairly targeted, that these issues happen right across the spectrum of workplaces. I might ask you to, a bit of a controversial one, but do you feel like the resources sector has been unfairly targeted, or do you think it was appropriate and right to have a look?
I reckon you've got to start somewhere.
Yep.
I really do. And, I think if, we are a well-resourced industry, and we most certainly have, issues to address, I'm proud that we're doing it.
And Owen, you've sort of touched on it already, but we know that the issues we're talking about here within the resources sector, not isolated to that sector. But where do you think the resources game sits in comparison to other major industries? Are they better, about the same, or still got a lot more work to do?
I think there's a lot more work to do, and I'd say the unique nature of the resources sector, that it has a range of elements that don't exist in other industries. Like the accommodation is a big part of that. We've got issues in every sector of the economy, but not all of them are providing camp accommodation and designing that accommodation and running the accommodation. And I think there's a added level of responsibility that comes when you're expecting people to spend a lot of the year away from their support networks and their families in terms of, to travel to remote and regional places. Isolation and the extra risks that are created through that isolated work as well is quite significant, as well as I think some deep-seated cultural issues that had existed in the industry for too long. I wouldn't say it's been unfairly targeted at all. I'd say it had unique characteristics that made it important to tackle first.
Richard, what was the feeling at Rio, within your department at least, when the report came through?
Look, I think it's really clear we've got a problem, and so we've got to get on and be part of the solution. And I think we would need to focus on the things we can control first, and then see if we can help others. And I was fortunate to spend 2 days with Kate Jenkins, and we'll hear from her later this afternoon, in the Pilbara. And what she really challenged me on is it's good to be working on your own company, it's good to be working with other resource companies, but actually in WA, the resource industry can help make a difference much broader than that. And I think that's a responsibility that we do have, and we really should be leading the way, but also helping others come on the journey with us.
Yeah. Owen, you touched on a couple of the challenges within this sector. The remote work, being away from your support network, some of the rostering issues that, no matter how many times or how many different ways you look at it, you can't really overcome them, can you? They are obvious, tangible challenges and hurdles to overcome. Are we going to get to a point where we simply can't do any more to bridge that gap between the conversation in the boardroom and what we can realistically do on a work site?
No, I think this is an issue where the work is never going to be done. We've set up frameworks for it to be addressed. We've had some good regulatory change. We've got conversations like the ones going on today, in this room. But I think we're a long way from distilling this conversation more broadly kind of throughout workplaces, and there is good elements of work being done, but one of the areas of which largely wasn't addressed by the parliamentary inquiry and largely isn't being addressed today at all is labour hire and contracting out in the industry, despite the fact it employs the majority of the workforce in the industry. They I don't think, gave any evidence to the parliamentary committee at all. It was all kind of direct employers. So I think there'll be a staged approach in terms of going through areas of high priority in the industry, but we're going to be.
That was one way to tail you off. There we go. Does that mean we're out of time? Hopefully not. We'll just We'll just yell a bit more. Oh, we're back. We're back. I'm not sure if everyone caught the tail end of what you were saying there, but you've led me to another point that I wanted to talk about. Direct employment versus contractor employment. When you're trying to drive this new set of values through your workplace and your workforce, given that there is such a high proportion of contractors on work sites, how big a challenge is it to get all of them on board with what you're trying to achieve as well? Sam, do you want to have a crack at that?
I think it's a real shift now in terms of how we look at that workforce. I think in the past it was quite segregated, or not segregated, but thought of separately. And I think with the changes in the legislation, that concept that we are all under the one roof, I think is really important. We, as a business, we look at all of the people on site, but it is really hard. And I think it comes down once again to aligning leadership. And making sure that the leaders of all the businesses that work together are actually rowing in the same direction. Yep.
Richard, what about for you? I know you've got a big team of contractors to manage as well.
Yeah, I think just like we see in our own workforce, we see a variability on the journey of contractors. We see some contractors we absolutely are learning from because they're setting the pace and doing better than us. We see some contractors that are having challenges and we can really lean in and help them. I think there's a really important underlying issue when we talk about contractors, and a range of other issues when it comes to psychosocial safety, and that's power imbalance. And power imbalance for me is one of the challenges we have in a workplace when we're trying to build psychological safety. And there is a power imbalance between employees and contractors, and we have to work our way through that. There's a number of other power imbalances we see in the workplace as well, and unless we're prepared to have the conversation about power imbalance, and unless we're prepared to tackle that, we won't get to true psychosocial safety.
While I've got you there, someone wants to know, as someone who's been driving the everyday respect and reflecting as a leader, what's been your proudest moment or impact that you've had in driving respect?
Look, there's probably two for me. The purple banners is something I'm really proud of, just seeing that conversation start. The other thing that I'm really proud of is in October for each of the last 2 years, we have shut down the entire iron ore operations business for an hour so every team can talk about respect. Now, historically, in our 50 years of history, the only time we've shut down our operations was when we had a fatality. Now we're doing it proactively to talk about respect. And if I think about the last 2 years, the first year we did that, supervisors and superintendents wanted senior leaders in the room to steer the conversation. 12 months on, last October, literally senior leaders got kicked out of the room because supervisors wanted to have a much more intimate, much more honest conversation. That progress in 12 months we shouldn't underestimate.
Yep. Anything that you can add to that, Sam? Proud moments that you've seen at IGO?
I think the way our teams work together, and that has improved over the years. The results that we get around feeling comfortable to speak to your supervisor, feeling comfortable to raise safety concerns, feeling comfortable to actually do the things in the workplace that I know, or we all know, will make change is really good to see. And I think, quite strangely, the level of reporting has increased over the last few years as well. So that conversation is being had much more often, which I think is a really positive thing.
Yeah. This might be a good one just to wrap up on, so I'll get each of you to share your thoughts on this. This person who's posted this says quite correctly, this is a big topic. What are the one or two big ticket items that companies can do to create a more mentally healthy workplace? Who wants to start with that? Your one or two big items that people can set their minds to.
Well, I've only got one, but I guess I can spin it to two. Communication and consultation with your workers. A lot of companies say they do it, but again, if workers are saying, well, yes, we've got these sort of structures in place, but having people from head office, having other people of the business really understand what we do, really understand the challenges, what we're experiencing on the ground, having those opportunities and avenues for collaboration, if you can really invest that time and effort in the communication consultation, you'll find that will flow on to the other strategies that you've got in place with mental health, respect, dealing with psychosocial hazards, all that sort of stuff as well. Just keep going. Quite a lot of times I see with interventions, it's rolled out, there's a lot of momentum at the start. Some organisations, I guess, when it comes to reviewing the effectiveness of the interventions or anything that they've implemented, that seems to sometimes fall by the wayside. So whether you put it as a place marker, whether you have those follow-up on conversations, always just review, because you might find that you may need to tweak it and get that sort of feedback as well. I'm pretty encouraged to hear that when Professor Sharon Parker said that 2 years' time, we're going to go back out into industry to really see whether anything has changed. That's a really, really good example. So in teams, organisations, head office, if you can have those conversations, review what you've done, what you've implemented, you'll find it'll just be a continuous cycle of improvement and change.
Richard?
My biggest reflection is that we have to make this change really personal. There's no doubt there's a whole bunch of physical changes we have to make and a whole bunch of system changes we have to make. But what I've learnt over the 2-year journey is that actually that change has got to start with me and everyone else in this room and everyone else in our workforce. And I think the realisation that each and every one of us has to move. Some of us have to move a little bit, some of us have to move a lot. But if we can just focus on moving that little bit each and every day, personally, I'm very optimistic about what we can do.
Brilliant. Owen?
I kind of find it hard to pin down one or two things instead of just being here for another 4 hours with 100 little things. But I think I'd just go back to some of the well-trodden path that Sharon Parker talked about. I talked about it before, but really job design is one of those harder things that to get right in workplaces that's consistently not done well. We know the research, we know that good job design, consultation and all the things that come with it is what will eliminate a lot of the kind of hazards that we're facing in the psychosocial realm, including harassment. It's easy to go for the easier things to do, but actually just having a more fundamental rethink about how we design work will get us to a lot closer to actually eliminating those hazards.
Thank you. Sam?
All right, all of that. So I get a few extras, yeah. So fundamentally, leadership. Developing leaders, supporting leaders, thinking about the new skills that they need that they just don't feel familiar or comfortable with. It's a big stretch for some, and we have to bring them on the journey. And they are, those mid-level, early career leaders are quite often put into roles quite underprepared for this stuff that they think is optional and they think is something that HR does. So leader development, and then the fact that this is not about rolling out stuff. This is a long journey. These are programs that are worthy because it's about respect and care for people in your workforce. So it's not a rollout that HR does.
All right, well, if we have this same conference in 5 years' time, it'll be interesting to see where we're at, and hopefully a lot more progress being made. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your insights this morning to our panellists. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions as well. Would you please thank Sam Retallack, Owen Whittle, Richard Cohen and Sam Lee.